I watched my grandmother die on a Tuesday, not from old age, not peacefully in her sleep. I watched her die because my mother held a pillow over her face while my uncle stood guard at the door, and my aunt rifled through her jewelry box in the corner of the room. And I have every second of it on camera. They don't know that yet. They don't know that the nanny cam I installed in Grandma's room 6 weeks ago, the one disguised as a digital clock on her nightstand, captured everything. The whispered arguments about money, the gradual increase in her medication, the moment my mother's hand stopped shaking and became steady, purposeful as she pressed down. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the story doesn't start with murder. It starts the way all family tragedies start, with love, and then with money, and then with the terrible things people convince themselves they deserve. My name is Sarah, and for the past 3 months, I've been living a double life. To my family, I'm the dutiful granddaughter, the one who moved back home to help care for Grandma after her stroke, the good girl who never quite measured up, who works as a veterinary assistant instead of a lawyer, like my cousin Marcus, who never married rich like my sister Jennifer. I'm the afterthought, the one they don't bother to lie to carefully because they assume I'm too simple to notice. They were wrong. Let me paint you a picture of the Miller family. From the outside, we look like every other upper-middle-class family in suburban Connecticut. My mother, Patricia, teaches literature at the local college. My uncle Richard owns 3 car dealerships. My Aunt Diane married a surgeon and spends her time on charity boards and book clubs. We have family dinners every Sunday. We send cards on birthdays. We smile in our Christmas photos. And underneath it all, we've been rotting for years. Grandma Rose was the glue that held us together, but she was also the wedge that drove us apart. She was a force of nature, a woman who'd built a small real estate empire starting with a single rental property in the 1960s. By the time I was born, she owned 42 properties across 3 states, worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 million. 18 million reasons for her children to smile through gritted teeth at Sunday dinners. I grew up watching my mother perform. That's the only word for it. Perform. The devoted daughter routine. She'd visit Grandma 3 times a week, bring her favorite cookies from the bakery on Maple Street, listen to the same stories about the old neighborhood that Grandma told over and over. But I saw what happened when we got in the car to drive home. The mask would slip. Mom would grip the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white, and she'd mutter about how Grandma was impossible and controlling and dangling that money over our heads like we're her trained dogs. I was 12 the first time I heard her say, "I'll throw a party when that woman finally dies." I'm 31 now. I've had 19 years to understand that my mother is capable of things that would horrify most people. 19 years of watching her smile to Grandma's face and calculate her inheritance behind her back. But knowing someone is capable of cruelty and watching them commit murder, those are 2 very different things. The stroke happened in March. Grandma was 87, still sharp as a tack, still managing her properties with an iron fist. She had a stroke while reviewing rental agreements in her study. Massive. Left side paralysis. The doctor said she'd never walk again, probably never talk clearly again, but she could still think. I could see it in her eyes when I visited her in the hospital. She was trapped in a body that wouldn't obey, but her mind was still there, still calculating, still aware. The family descended on her hospital room like vultures circling a carcass. Uncle Richard brought his lawyer. Aunt Diane brought her husband's doctor friend to get a second opinion. My mother brought photocopies of Grandma's will that she'd somehow obtained, with certain sections highlighted in yellow. I brought flowers, real ones, not the expensive arrangement from the hospital gift shop. Daisies from the farmer's market, because Grandma always said roses were too pretentious, too obvious. She couldn't speak, but when I put them in the vase by her bed, she looked at me, really looked at me. And I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen directed at me before. Recognition. Not just of who I was, but of what I was. The one who actually gave a damn. "I'll take care of you, Grandma," I whispered, holding her hand. The left one? The one that could still squeeze back. Just barely. "I promise." She squeezed. Once. Deliberate. That's when I knew. That's when I understood that whatever was about to happen, Grandma knew it too. She'd spent 60 years reading people, building an empire by understanding human nature in all its ugly glory. She knew exactly what her children were, and she was scared. The hospital released her after 6 weeks, not because she'd recovered, she hadn't, but because Medicare wouldn't cover any more of her stay, and the family couldn't agree on a rehabilitation facility. Uncle Richard wanted the cheapest option. Aunt Diane wanted the one with the best connections for her social circle. My mother wanted to bring Grandma home, where she could provide personal care in a familiar environment. I'm sure you can guess which option won. Mom's house was chosen because it was the largest, because Mom had the most flexible schedule, because it made the most sense logically. What nobody said out loud. It was chosen because my mother was the most willing to do what needed to be done. I'd moved out of my mother's house when I was 22, got a small apartment near the veterinary clinic where I worked. It wasn't much. A 1-bedroom over a laundromat with pipes that groaned and neighbors who fought at 2 a.m., but it was mine. The day after Grandma came home, my mother called me. "Sarah, honey, I need your help." Her voice had that brittle quality it got when she was about to ask for something she knew I wouldn't want to give. "Taking care of your grandmother is more work than I anticipated. You're so good with her, and you don't have a family of your own to worry about." There it was, the subtle dig wrapped in a request. "I was thinking you could move back home for a while, just until we get into a routine. You'd have your old room, and I'd cover your rent so you wouldn't lose your apartment. It would mean so much to Grandma, to me." I should have said no. I should have set a boundary, maintained my independence, protected the life I'd built brick by brick away from this family. But I thought about Grandma's eyes in that hospital room, that moment of recognition, that squeeze of her hand. "Okay," I said, "I'll move back." My mother's relief was audible through the phone. "Oh, Sarah, thank you. You're such a good daughter. This is going to be perfect." Perfect. That word would haunt me later. I moved back on a Saturday. My old bedroom looked exactly the same as it had when I left. Lilac walls, white furniture, a twin bed with a floral comforter. Frozen in time, like my mother had been waiting for me to fail and return. Grandma's room was down the hall. Mom had converted the first-floor guest room for her, easier than trying to get her up the stairs. They'd rented a hospital bed, installed grab bars in the attached bathroom, turned the bright, airy room into something clinical and sad. Grandma was asleep when I first peeked in, or pretending to be. Her face looked smaller somehow, like the stroke had stolen some essential part of her physical presence, but her breathing was strong, steady. I unpacked my things quietly, hung my scrubs in the closet, set up my laptop on the old desk. This was temporary, I told myself. A few months maybe. Just until Grandma stabilized, or until Mom hired a proper nurse. I had no idea. I was moving into a crime scene in progress. The first week was exactly what you'd expect. I helped Grandma with her physical therapy exercises, read to her from the mystery novels she loved, learn to understand her limited speech. She could say a few words. Yes, no, water, Sarah. But mostly she communicated with her eyes, with squeezes of her good hand, with the tiny movements of her head. We developed a system. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. Eyes to the right meant she was in pain. Eyes to the left meant she was afraid. She looked left a lot when my mother entered the room. I noticed other things too. Small things that didn't quite add up. The pill organizer on Grandma's nightstand had more pills than the prescription bottles warranted. I counted. 3 times. The numbers didn't match. Mom insisted on personally administering all of Grandma's medications. Wouldn't let me help. Wouldn't let the part-time aide we'd hired touch them. Grandma would be alert and responsive in the morning, but by afternoon she'd be foggy, confused, sleeping for hours. "It's just her body healing," Mom said when I asked. "The doctor said to expect good days and bad days." But the bad days followed a pattern. Always after Mom gave her the afternoon medications. I'm not a doctor, I'm a veterinary assistant, but I know what sedation looks like. I've administered enough pre-surgery medications to cats and dogs to recognize the signs, the drooping eyelids, the slowed responses, the deep, unnatural sleep. Someone was drugging my grandmother. Week 2, I started paying closer attention. I'd find excuses to be in Grandma's room when Mom brought the pills. I'd watch from the doorway pretending to fold laundry or tidy up. Mom was careful, but not careful enough. She'd make a show of taking the pills from the organizer, pouring water, helping Grandma sit up. But her back would be to me, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd see her palm something. A quick movement, practiced. Extra pills going in. Pills that weren't in the original prescription. I needed proof. I needed to know if I was being paranoid or if my mother was actually doing what I was afraid she was doing. That's when I bought the camera. It wasn't premeditated, not really. I was at the electronics store buying batteries for Grandma's radio, and I walked past a display of home security systems, the nanny cams. Monitor your home from anywhere, the sign promised. One of them was disguised as a digital clock, black, sleek, completely ordinary. It would blend right into Grandma's nightstand next to her reading lamp and her water glass. I stood there for 20 minutes holding the box, having an argument with myself. This is crazy. This is paranoid. This is your mother. But what if it's not crazy? What if Grandma's looking left because she knows? I bought the camera. Setting it up was easier than I expected. The camera fed to an app on my phone via Wi-Fi. I waited until Mom went grocery shopping, replaced Grandma's old clock with the new one, tested the angle. Perfect view of the bed, the nightstand, the door. Anyone who entered would be clearly visible. Grandma watched me set it up. I didn't try to hide what I was doing. Just in case, I told her, adjusting the clock so the camera lens had a clear line of sight. To make sure everything is okay. She squeezed my hand 3 times. Fast, urgent. That wasn't our code. We'd never established what 3 squeezes meant, but I understood anyway. Hurry. For the first few days, the camera showed me exactly nothing interesting. Mom brought pills, Grandma took them, I helped with physical therapy, the aide came and went. Uncle Richard stopped by once, stayed for 10 minutes, looked uncomfortable the whole time. Normal, boring. Everything was fine, and I was just a paranoid granddaughter with too much true crime podcast exposure. Then, on day 4, I checked the footage from the afternoon while I was at work at the clinic. I was in the middle of holding a very angry tabby cat for a nail trim when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera. I glanced at it during a break. The footage showed my mother entering Grandma's room at 2:47 p.m., right on schedule for the afternoon medications. But she wasn't alone. Uncle Richard was with her. They stood by the bed, talking in low voices that the camera's audio couldn't quite catch. Mom held the pill organizer. Richard held a folder, legal documents from the looks of it. I watched as Mom administered the pills, then pulled out another bottle from her pocket, not one I'd seen before. She shook out 2 pills, crushed them against the nightstand with a spoon, mixed the powder into Grandma's water. Grandma drank. She always did what she was told, now that she couldn't argue. Within minutes, her eyes glazed over. That deep, sedated look I'd been noticing. Richard leaned over her, put the papers in front of her face. I couldn't see what they were, but I saw him guide Grandma's good hand to hold a pen. "Just sign here, Mom," he said. His voice was clearer now, closer to the camera. "It's just updating your power of attorney, making things easier. You want things to be easier, don't you?" Grandma's head moved. Could have been a nod. Could have been a tremor from the stroke. Could have been her trying to shake her head no while the drugs made it impossible to resist. Richard guided her hand. A shaky signature appeared on the paper. My mother smiled. "Good. That's done then." They left together, talking in low tones. Richard clapped Mom on the shoulder as they walked out of frame. I stood in the veterinary clinic's break room, holding my phone, watching my grandmother lie unconscious in her bed, and felt something cold settle into my stomach. This wasn't just about keeping her quiet. This wasn't just about making caregiving easier. This was about control, legal control, of her assets, of everything she'd built. I watched the rest of the week's footage that night. All of it. Hours of video that I scrubbed through at double speed, looking for patterns, for evidence, for proof of what I was beginning to suspect. The pattern was clear once I knew to look for it. Mom administered Grandma's regular medications morning and evening. Those were legitimate, matched the prescriptions from the hospital. But every afternoon she'd add something extra, the crushed pills in the water, Sometimes one, sometimes two, always resulting in that deep sedation. And during that sedated window, people would visit. Uncle Richard came 3 times in 1 week, always with papers, always getting signatures. Aunt Diane came once. She didn't bring papers. She brought Grandma's jewelry box. The antique one from Grandma's house, the one with the good stuff. The diamonds. The gold. The estate pieces. I watched her go through it, holding pieces up to the light, slipping some into her purse. Grandma's eyes were open during this. I could see them tracking Diane's movements, aware but unable to respond, unable to stop her own daughter from robbing her while she lay helpless. My cousin Marcus came with his wife. They measured the room, actually measured it with a tape measure while Grandma slept off whatever Mom had given her. "It's bigger than I thought," Marcus's wife said. "We could fit the nursery furniture in here easily." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Marcus replied, but he was smiling. "But yeah, this room has good light. Baby would like it." They were planning, already dividing up the house, the rooms, the life they'd have after Grandma died. I sat on my bed, door locked, headphones in, and watched my family systematically betray the woman who'd given them everything. And I realized something that made my hands shake with rage. They weren't waiting for her to die naturally. They were going to help it along. I want to tell you that I went to the police immediately, that I downloaded the footage, marched into the station, and let justice take its course like a responsible citizen. But I didn't. Because here's what I knew. I had footage of my family giving my grandmother extra medication and getting her to sign papers. Unethical? Absolutely. Elder abuse? Probably, but murder? Not yet. A good lawyer and my family could afford the best, would argue that they were helping a stroke victim, who was in pain, who was confused, who needed assistance managing her affairs. The pills could be explained away as anti-anxiety medication, sleep aids, pain management. The signatures could be legitimate updates to legal documents. The jewelry, Grandma could have told Diane to take it for safekeeping. I had evidence of bad behavior, not criminal intent. So I waited. I watched. And I planned. I became the perfect granddaughter. I smiled at family dinners. I thanked Mom for letting me stay in my old room. I brought Grandma her meals, helped her with physical therapy, read to her in the evenings, and every night, after everyone was asleep, I'd download the day's footage, tag it, catalog it. I created a spreadsheet tracking every medication administered, every visitor, every suspicious conversation the camera's audio picked up. I was building a case. I just didn't know what crime I was documenting yet. Grandma knew, though. She started looking at me differently. When we were alone, when Mom wasn't hovering, when the medications had worn off enough for her to be present, she'd squeeze my hand and try to tell me something. One afternoon, 3 weeks after I had installed the camera, she managed 3 words. "Sarah, my will." Her voice was slurred, thick with the effort of forcing her damaged brain to cooperate, but the intent was clear. "Your will." I leaned closer. "What about it, Grandma?" She squeezed my hand, her good hand, the right one, gripping mine with surprising strength. "Changed. They changed." My blood went cold. "They changed your will? Mom and Richard?" One squeeze. "Yes." "Without your consent?" One squeeze. "What did they change it to?" But she was fading. The afternoon medication was kicking in. I could see it in her eyes, the light dimming, the fog rolling in. She fought it, tried to stay present, but her grip loosened. "Rest, Grandma, we'll talk later." But we both knew later was getting more dangerous. Whatever timeline my family was operating on, it was accelerating. That night, I went through the footage again, this time looking specifically for the document signing sessions. I zoomed in, enhanced the image quality as much as my phone's app would allow. Tried to read what was on those papers Richard kept bringing. Most of it was illegible. Too far from the camera, wrong angle. But on one clip from 2 weeks prior, Richard had set the folder down on Grandma's nightstand while he answered a phone call. The camera had a perfect view. Last will and testament of Rose Eleanor Miller. And below it, in smaller text that I had to squint to read, Draft for 4. Revised distribution. Draft 4. How many times had they revised it? How many times had they brought my drugged, helpless grandmother updates to sign? I needed to know what was in the current version of her will, the real one, the one Grandma had made when she was still herself. I needed to compare it to whatever they'd coerced her into signing. Grandma's lawyer was a man named Harold Finch. I'd met him once, years ago, at a family gathering. He was old school, the kind of lawyer who still worked out of a small office with wood paneling and leather-bound books. Grandma trusted him because he'd been handling her affairs since 1983. I called his office the next morning during my lunch break at the clinic. "Finch and Associates, how may I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about Rose Miller's estate planning documents. I'm her granddaughter, Sarah." A pause. "I'm sorry, miss, but I can't discuss client information without proper authorization." "Of course not. Why would anything be easy?" "I understand. Could you tell me who currently has power of attorney for Mrs. Miller?" Another pause, longer this time. The sound of typing. "According to our records, that would be Patricia Miller, her daughter, but that authorization was just updated last week. Before that, Mrs. Miller hadn't assigned anyone POA. She always preferred to handle her own affairs." "Last week, right after Richard's visit with the papers." "And her will? When was that last updated?" "Miss, I really can't, please." I surprised myself with the desperation in my voice. "I'm worried about my grandmother. Things are happening that don't feel right. I just need to know when she last updated her will." A long silence, then quietly. "The original will was drafted in 2019. We received an updated version last week for filing. Significant changes to the distribution of assets." "What kind of changes?" "I can't disclose specifics, but Miss Miller, if you have concerns about your grandmother's welfare or the validity of legal documents signed during her incapacitation, you should contact Adult Protective Services or the police." He hung up. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot, hands shaking. Last week. They'd changed everything last week. While I was at work, while Grandma was sedated, they'd rewritten her entire legacy. I drove home in a fog. Walked through the front door to find Mom in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming to herself. "Sarah, perfect timing. Can you check on your grandmother? I thought I heard her call out." I went to Grandma's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, tears running down her temples into her white hair. "Grandma." I grabbed a tissue, gently wiped her face. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" 2 squeezes. "No." "Are you sad?" 1 squeeze. "Yes." "About the will?" Her whole body tensed. 1 squeeze, so hard it hurt my hand. I knelt beside her bed, bringing my face close to hers so she could see me clearly. "I know what they're doing. I have proof. I'm going to fix this, I promise." She looked at me, and for a moment the fog cleared completely. Her eyes were sharp, present, the way they used to be, and in them, I saw something that terrified me. Not hope, fear. She wasn't afraid they'd succeed in stealing her money. She was afraid of what they'd do to make sure she never told anyone. Sunday dinner, the weekly Miller family tradition that I'd been dreading. Everyone was there. Mom, Uncle Richard, Aunt Diane, Marcus and his pregnant wife Kelly, my sister Jennifer and her hedge fund manager husband Brad. Even the grandkids, Marcus and Kelly's toddler twin boys, running around the dining room, blissfully unaware that they were eating pot roast in a house where their great-grandmother was being slowly murdered. Grandma was in her room. "Too tired to join us," Mom had explained with a sad smile. "The stroke really takes it out of her." The stroke. Right, not the extra sedatives you'd given her an hour before everyone arrived. I pushed food around my plate and tried to look normal. Tried not to think about the camera recording everything in the next room. Tried not to imagine what this footage would look like to a jury someday. "Sarah, you look tired." Aunt Diane's voice cut through my thoughts. She was looking at me with that concerned expression she wore like a mask. "Taking care of Mother must be exhausting." "It's fine. I'm happy to help." "Still, you can't do it forever. You have your own life to think about." She glanced at my mother. Patricia, we should really discuss hiring a full-time nurse, someone professional. We've talked about this, Mom said, her voice tight. Mother doesn't like strangers. She's more comfortable with family. Family? Can't provide round-the-clock medical care, Uncle Richard interjected. He was on his third glass of wine. We need to be realistic about her needs. What we need, Marcus said, setting down his fork, is to have a frank conversation about Mother's long-term care plan and her estate. The table went quiet. Even the twins stopped running, sensing the shift in energy. Marcus, this isn't the time, my mother said. When is the time, Aunt Pat? When she's gone. When we're fighting about it at her funeral. He leaned back in his chair, all confidence, the lawyer in him coming out. We all know the situation. Grandma Rose's stroke left her incapacitated. She's never going to recover. The doctors have said as much. They said she might improve with therapy, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me like I'd interrupted the adults. Sarah, honey, Jennifer said in that condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. We all want to be optimistic, but we also need to be practical. Grandma is 87 years old. She's had a massive stroke. The quality of life she has now, is this really what she would have wanted? Quality of life. What a convenient phrase. She's still aware, I said. She's still in there. She can communicate. She can say 3 words and squeeze your hand, Marcus interrupted. That's not living, that's existing, and it's costing a fortune. The medical equipment, the medications, the home modifications. This is draining her estate. Her estate that she built for herself, I shot back. Not for us. Uncle Richard's face reddened. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Sarah. My mother's voice had an edge to it, a warning. We're all just trying to do what's best for your grandmother. Are we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like everyone's more concerned about their inheritance than about her actual care. The silence that followed was nuclear. Aunt Diane dabbed her mouth with her napkin. I think someone's been spending too much time alone with Mother, getting ideas. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Marcus said, leaning forward, that maybe Grandma Rose has been talking to you, saying things, making promises about the will. She can barely speak, but she can write, can't she? With help? She could change beneficiaries if someone convinced her to. I stared at him, at all of them. They thought I was the threat. They thought I was trying to manipulate Grandma for money. The irony was staggering. I don't want Grandma's money, I said clearly. I just want her to be treated with respect and dignity. I want her to have agency over her own life and her own choices. Her choices? Uncle Richard laughed. She's not capable of making choices anymore, Sarah. That's why we have power of attorney. That's why we had to update the will. Had to. Not she wanted to. Had to. The will is settled, my mother said firmly. Harold filed the new version last week. Everything is divided equally among her children, with provisions for the grandchildren's education. Clean, simple, fair. And what did the old will say? I asked. Mom's eyes narrowed. Why would that matter? Because if Grandma wanted it changed, she would have changed it when she was still capable of making her own decisions, before the stroke. The old will was complicated, Aunt Diane said carefully. It had stipulations, conditions. Some of us were favored over others. It wasn't fair. So you made it fair by drugging her and forcing her to sign a new one. I said it. The words were out before I could stop them, hanging in the air like smoke. Jennifer gasped. Brad's fork clattered to his plate. The twins started crying. My mother stood up slowly. Her face was white. That is a serious accusation, Sarah. Is it an accusation if it's true? Uncle Richard stood too. You need to be very careful about what you say next. Or what? You'll cut me out of the will? I already told you I don't want the money. Then what do you want? Mom's voice was shaking. With rage or fear, I couldn't tell. I want you to stop. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're doing, just stop. Let Grandma live out her days in peace. We are, Aunt Diane said. We're making her comfortable. You're keeping her sedated so she doesn't interfere with your plans. She's in pain, Mom insisted. The medication is for pain management. Then why isn't it prescribed? Why are you crushing up pills and hiding them in her water? The table erupted. Everyone talking at once, voices raised, accusations flying. Marcus was demanding to know if I'd been spying. Jennifer was crying. Uncle Richard was threatening to have me removed from the house. And through it all, I kept thinking about Grandma in the next room, probably awake from all the noise, listening to her family tear itself apart over money she wasn't even dead yet to give them. Enough! My mother's voice cut through the chaos. She was standing at the head of the table, hands flat on the wood, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. Sarah, I think you need to go back to your apartment. Tonight. No. This isn't a request. You're clearly not in the right frame of mind to provide care. I'm not leaving Grandma alone with you. She's not alone. She's with her family. That's what I'm afraid of. My mother walked around the table slowly, deliberately, came to stand right in front of me. Let me be very clear, she said softly. You are accusing your family, your own mother, of elder abuse, of drugging an incapacitated woman, of coercion and fraud. Do you have any idea how serious those accusations are? Yes. And do you have any proof? I thought about the camera, the hundreds of hours of footage, the documented evidence of everything I'd accused them of. Yes, I said again. Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, calculation. Then, I suppose we have a problem. She went to the hallway, grabbed my coat from the closet, held it out to me. Go home, Sarah. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down. I'm not leaving. You don't have a choice. This is my house. Grandma's care is my responsibility, too. You asked me to move back to help. And now I'm asking you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, the entire family watching, waiting to see who would break first. I broke. Not because I was afraid of the police, but because I realized something crucial. They didn't know about the camera. They thought I had no proof, that my accusations were just suspicions. If I pushed too hard now, they'd know I had evidence. They'd find the camera, destroy it. I needed them to think they'd won. Fine, I said, grabbing my coat. I'll go. Mom's shoulders relaxed. Thank you. We can talk in a few days when emotions aren't so high. I looked around the table one last time, at Uncle Richard's satisfied smirk, at Aunt Diane's carefully neutral expression, at Marcus's contempt, at Jennifer's relief, at my mother's smile. I meant what I said, I told them. About not wanting the money, I don't care about the inheritance. We know, Mom said gently, patronizingly. That's part of why we love you. I left, walked out of that house, got in my car, drove to my apartment above the laundromat, and immediately called Harold Finch's emergency number. Harold Finch met me at a 24-hour diner at midnight. He looked exactly like you'd expect a 70-year-old estate attorney to look. Rumpled suit, thinning hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Miss Miller, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Your message sounded urgent. It is. I pulled out my phone. I need you to watch something. I showed him 3 clips. Just 3. I didn't want to overwhelm him. The first was Richard getting Grandma to sign papers while she was clearly sedated. The second was my mother crushing pills and mixing them into water. The third was Aunt Diane going through the jewelry box. He watched in silence, his expression growing darker with each clip. How long has this been happening? He asked quietly. Weeks, maybe longer. I only started recording 3 weeks ago. And you're certain she didn't consent to these medications? That she was being forced? She told me they changed her will without her consent. When she was lucid, she told me. Harold rubbed his face. This is very serious. If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at elder abuse, fraud, possibly undue influence invalidating the new will. Can you help her? I can try. But Sarah, you need to understand. These are your family members. If we pursue this, there will be legal consequences. Criminal charges. Your mother, your uncle, they could go to prison. I know. He studied me carefully. And you're prepared for that? Was I? Was I prepared to destroy my family, to be the person who put her own mother in prison? I thought about Grandma's eyes, the fear in them, the way she squeezed my hand in warning. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to petition for an emergency review of Mrs. Miller's competency when she signed the new will. I'll request that the court appoint an independent guardian ad litem to assess the situation. And I'm going to contact Adult Protective Services with your evidence. How long will that take? Best case? A few days for APS to investigate, maybe a week for the court to schedule a hearing. He paused. But Sarah, if your family suspects what you're doing, they might escalate. If they think they're about to lose control. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I know, I said. That's why I need to go back. What? They kicked me out tonight. But I need to be there. I need the camera to keep recording. If they're planning something, I need evidence. Sarah, if they're planning to harm your grandmother, then I need to catch them in the act. Otherwise, it's just my word against theirs. And they'll say I'm a disgruntled granddaughter making up stories. Harold looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew I was right. Give me 2 days, he said. 2 days to get the legal wheels turning, then you can back off, let the authorities handle it. 2 days, I agreed. We shook hands. I drove back to my apartment, opened the camera app on my phone, and watched the live feed from Grandma's room. She was awake, staring at the ceiling, alone in that hospital bed in my mother's house, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. I watched until she fell asleep. Then I watched some more. At 3 a.m., my mother entered the room. I sat up in bed, phone in hand, watching the grainy footage. Mom walked to Grandma's bedside, just stood there looking down at her sleeping mother. In the dim light from the nightstand lamp, I could see her expression. It wasn't sad. It wasn't conflicted. It was determined. She picked up a pillow from the chair in the corner, held it in both hands, looked at it, then at Grandma, then back at the pillow. My heart stopped. She was considering it, actually standing there at 3 a.m, holding a pillow, looking at her unconscious mother, and considering whether to end it right now. I was halfway to my car before I realized I was moving. I had to get there. I had to stop her. But by the time I pulled into the driveway 15 minutes later, Mom's bedroom light was off. The house was dark. I checked the camera. Grandma was alone, still sleeping peacefully. Mom had put the pillow back. Not yet, I realized. She wasn't ready yet, but she was thinking about it, planning it. The clock was ticking faster than I'd thought. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked down the street, watching the camera feed. At 6 a.m., I drove back to my apartment, showered, and went to work like everything was normal. It wasn't. That afternoon, Harold called. I filed the emergency petition. APS is sending an investigator tomorrow morning. They'll interview your grandmother privately, assess her living conditions, review her medications. What did you tell them? Everything. I sent them the video clips. They're taking this very seriously, Sarah. Relief flooded through me. Tomorrow. By tomorrow, Grandma would be safe. Thank you, Harold. Don't thank me yet. When APS shows up, your family's going to know someone reported them. They'll know it was you. I don't care. You should. People who are desperate do desperate things. He was right, but I was already committed. That evening, I got a text from my mother. Sarah, I'm sorry about Sunday. I overreacted. Can we talk? Come for dinner tomorrow? Tomorrow. The same day APS was coming. This wasn't an olive branch. This was a test. She wanted to see if I'd back down, if I'd come crawling back, apologetic and compliant. Or maybe she wanted me there when they came, wanted to control the narrative with me in the room. I texted back, I'll be there, 6 p.m. Perfect. I love you, sweetheart. 3 words that used to mean something. Now they just felt hollow. I checked the camera feed obsessively that night. Every hour, on the hour, watching for any sign that they were moving their timeline up, that they suspected what was coming. At 11 p.m., Uncle Richard and Aunt Diane showed up. I watched them gather in the kitchen with my mother, talking in low voices. The camera in Grandma's room couldn't pick up their conversation, but I could see their shadows moving in the hallway. They talked for an hour. When Richard and Diane left, they hugged my mother for a long time. It looked like goodbye. I didn't sleep at all that night. Tuesday, the day everything ended, I arrived at Mom's house at 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes early for dinner, early enough to check on Grandma before APS showed up at 6:30. But when I walked in, the house was too quiet. "Mom," I called out. No answer. Grandma's room was at the end of the hall. The door was closed. It was never closed. Mom kept it open so she could hear if Grandma called out. I walked toward it, my footsteps loud in the silence, my heart hammering. "Mom?" I tried again. The door opened. My mother stood there blocking the entrance. Her face was red, her eyes wet. Behind her I could see movement, Uncle Richard standing by the bed. "Sarah, you're early." "What's going on?" "Your grandmother, she had an episode. We called 911, they're on their way." I pushed past her. Grandma was in bed, eyes closed, not moving. Uncle Richard stood by the window, looking out at the street. Aunt Diane was in the corner, crying into her hands. "What happened?" I demanded. "Her breathing became labored," Mom said. "We think it was another stroke, or cardiac arrest. The paramedics will know more." I rushed to Grandma's side, grabbed her wrist to feel for a pulse. Nothing. No pulse. No breathing. Her skin was still warm, but there was nothing. No life. Just an empty shell in a hospital bed. "How long?" My voice came out strangled. "How long what?" "How long has she been like this?" "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe 10 minutes. We found her like this." "You're lying." The words hung in the air. Mom's expression shifted. "Excuse me?" I looked at Richard, at Diane, at my mother. "You're all lying. She didn't have another stroke. You killed her." Diane gasped. "How dare you?" "Sarah, grief is making you say terrible things," Mom said carefully. "But we understand. We're upset too." "I have it on camera." Silence. "What?" Uncle Richard's voice was sharp. "I have cameras in this room. I've been recording everything for 3 weeks. Every pill you forced on her, every document you made her sign, every conversation about how much her death would be worth to you." My mother's face went white. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and showed them the live feed. The view of Grandma's room from the nightstand. The digital clock that wasn't just a clock. "I've seen everything," I said, "and I've given copies to Grandma's lawyer and to Adult Protective Services. They're on their way here now." The room exploded into motion. Richard lunged for the nightstand, grabbing the clock camera and throwing it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. "You little bitch," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I saved the evidence. That changes nothing." "Evidence of what?" Mom's voice was rising. "Of us taking care of our mother? Of managing her medications and her affairs while she was incapacitated?" "Of you murdering her." "She died of natural causes," Aunt Diane said, but her voice shook. "The paramedics will confirm it. An 87-year-old stroke victim having cardiac arrest. There's nothing suspicious about that." "Then why are you all so scared?" The doorbell rang. We all froze. "That's the paramedics," Mom said, "or APS. Either way, Sarah, you're going to regret this. You're going to tear this family apart over nothing." "Over nothing? Grandma's dead." "She was dying anyway," Richard shouted. "You said it yourself. She had no quality of life. We did her a favor. By smothering her with a pillow." The words were out before I could think them through. Diane's sobbing stopped. Richard went still. Mom's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I saw you. Last night, standing over her with a pillow, deciding whether to do it." "I was fluffing her pillows, you paranoid." "And tonight you finished what you started." The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. Insistent. My mother walked to me slowly, deliberately, got close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same scent she'd worn my entire life. Vanilla and lavender, the smell of home. "Listen to me very carefully," she said softly. "You have no proof of anything. Yes, we managed Mother's care. Yes, we updated her legal documents with her consent. Yes, she died. Tragically, unexpectedly, but from natural causes. The medications in her system were all prescribed. The documents were all legally obtained. And any video you think you have can be explained away as a granddaughter misinterpreting end-of-life care. The jury won't think so. There won't be a jury, Sarah, because there's no crime, just a sad old woman who had a stroke and died in her sleep surrounded by family who loved her." "You didn't love her, you loved her money." Mom smiled. Actually smiled. "Prove it." The door opened downstairs, footsteps in the hall, voices calling out, "Anyone home? Paramedics." My mother smoothed her hair, composed her face into a mask of grief, and went to meet them. I stood in that room, next to my grandmother's body, surrounded by the broken pieces of the camera, and realized something terrible. She was right. Without the camera, without the evidence, it was just my word against theirs. And they were good liars. They'd been practicing their whole lives. The paramedics confirmed what we already knew. Rose Eleanor Miller, 87 years old, had passed away. Probable cause, cardiac arrest, secondary to recent stroke. Sad, but expected in a patient her age with her medical history. The APS investigator arrived 20 minutes later. She interviewed all of us separately, examined Grandma's medications, looked at the care records Mom had meticulously kept. Everything was in order. Everything looked legitimate. Except I pulled her aside in the hallway and told her everything. About the videos, about the drugging, about the forced documents. "Do you still have the footage?" she asked. "Yes, on my phone and backed up to the cloud." "I'll need to see it." We sat in my car in the driveway, and I showed her everything. Hours of footage compressed into the most damning clips. By the time we finished, her expression was grim. "This is significant. I'm going to recommend a full investigation. The police will need to be involved. This is beyond APS jurisdiction." "Will they arrest them?" "That's up to the detective assigned to the case." "But Sarah, you need to understand. Elder abuse cases are hard to prosecute, especially when the victim is deceased. A lot depends on whether the medical examiner finds anything suspicious in the autopsy." "Autopsy?" "Any unexpected death can be investigated. I'll request one, given the circumstances." Hope sparked in my chest. "How long will that take?" "A few days for preliminary results, longer for a full toxicology report." "A few days?" Grandma would be in a morgue for a few days while they cut her open and examined her organs and tested her blood and maybe found proof that she'd been murdered. And in the meantime, my family would walk, free. The police came the next morning. Detective Sarah Chen, and yes, we had the same first name, which felt like some kind of cosmic joke, sat across from me in my apartment and listened to my story for the third time. I'd already told it to the APS investigator, then to the 911 dispatcher who'd taken my frantic call at midnight when I realized what I'd witnessed, and now to her. She was younger than I expected. Maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. "Walk me through the timeline again," she said, pen poised over her notepad. "You installed the camera on what date?" "October 15th, 3 weeks before she died." "And you began noticing suspicious behavior before that?" "Yes. The extra medications, the sedation, the way they'd visit during those windows when she was too out of it to resist. That's why I installed the camera." "Did you tell anyone about your concerns before installing the camera?" "No." "Why not?" I hesitated. "Because I didn't have proof, just suspicions, and they're my family. I wanted to be wrong." Detective Chen nodded, making notes. "And you have all the footage backed up?" "Yes, on my phone, my laptop, and cloud storage." "I'm going to need all of it, every second you recorded." "Of course." She looked up from her notepad. Sarah, I want to be straight with you. What you've shown me is disturbing. If the autopsy confirms high levels of unprescribed medications in her system, we may have a case for elder abuse and possibly manslaughter. But murder is hard to prove. I saw my mother with the pillow. I know, and that's compelling. But she didn't actually do it in that footage. She picked up the pillow, yes, but she put it back. A defense attorney will argue she was just arranging her mother's bedding. And the night she died? The paramedics found no signs of asphyxiation, no petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, no bruising around the nose or mouth. If someone suffocated her, they did it in a way that left no physical evidence. So they get away with it. I didn't say that. I said murder is hard to prove. But the pattern of behavior you've documented, the drugging, the coerced signatures, the theft of property, that's prosecutable. We can charge them with elder abuse, fraud, theft, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Those are serious felonies. But not murder. Not unless the autopsy gives us something to work with. She left with my phone, promising to return it after they'd extracted the evidence. I sat in my empty apartment, feeling hollowed out. Grandma was dead. I'd tried to save her, and I'd failed. All I'd managed to do was document her last weeks of life, her systematic betrayal by the people who were supposed to love her. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 4 days after her death. My mother called to tell me. I know things are complicated right now, she said, her voice carefully neutral. But she was still your grandmother. You should be there to say goodbye. Will the police let you attend, or are you under arrest? A pause. We haven't been charged with anything, Sarah, and we won't be, because we didn't do anything wrong. The police have the videos. Yes, and I'm sure they'll review them and see exactly what I told you they'd see. A family caring for a dying woman. You've made things very difficult for all of us, but the truth will come out. Yes, I said. It will. She hung up. I didn't go to the funeral. Instead, I sat in my apartment and watched the live stream that Jennifer had set up for out-of-town family. Watched my mother deliver a eulogy about what a strong woman Grandma Rose had been, how much she'd loved her family, how she'd lived a full life and died peacefully at home. The comment section filled with condolences, friends saying what a wonderful daughter Patricia was, how devoted, how she'd sacrificed so much to care for her mother in those final weeks. I closed the laptop before I threw it across the room. The autopsy results came back on Monday. Detective Chen called me at work. I stepped outside the clinic, stood in the parking lot in my scrubs, and listened to her explain what they had found. High levels of alprazolam and zolpidem in her system. Neither were prescribed to her. Anxiety medication and sleeping pills, I said, my medical knowledge kicking in. Right, enough to keep her heavily sedated, but not enough to kill her outright. The medical examiner also found evidence of aspiration, pneumonia, fluid in the lungs consistent with someone who'd been lying down for extended periods. From the forced sedation. Possibly, but Sarah, here's the problem. None of this definitively proves she was murdered. The ME ruled the cause of death as cardiac arrest brought on by complications from her stroke. The medications contributed to her decline, but they didn't directly cause her death. I felt the world tilt. So they're not going to be charged. I didn't say that. We're charging your mother, uncle, and aunt with elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. The DA thinks we have a solid case based on the video evidence and the forged will, but it's not a murder charge. How long will they go to prison? If convicted, elder abuse can carry up to 4 years, financial exploitation, another 5. Fraud depends on the amount, but with an $18 million estate involved, we're looking at serious time. 9 years, maximum. For stealing my grandmother's agency, her dignity, her final weeks of life. It's not enough, I said. I know, but it's what we can prove. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, my family closed ranks. My mother hired the best defense attorney money could buy, ironically using Grandma's estate to pay for it. They filed motions to suppress the video evidence, arguing I'd violated wiretapping laws by recording without consent. They painted me as a troubled granddaughter with financial motives of my own, suggesting I'd installed the camera to create false evidence and contest the will that they'd forced Grandma to sign. They were good. They'd thought of everything, but they'd made one mistake. Harold Finch found it. He called me 3 months before trial, his voice trembling with excitement. "Sarah, I was going through Rose's original will, the one she drafted in 2019, before all this happened. There's a clause I'd forgotten about." "What kind of clause?" "A no contest clause. It states that anyone who challenges the will or contests its validity forfeits their inheritance entirely. The money goes to charity instead." I didn't understand at first. "But they're not contesting the will. They're the ones who changed it." "Exactly. But by changing it through coercion, by getting her to sign a new version while she was incapacitated, they violated the spirit of that clause. And more importantly, Rose included a separate provision, a video will." "A what?" "In 2019, she recorded a video statement to be played after her death. She gave me a sealed copy to be opened only if there was any dispute about her estate or her wishes. I'd completely forgotten about it until I was reviewing the files. My heart started racing. "What's in it?" "I don't know. She recorded it privately and sealed it herself. But she told me at the time that it was her insurance policy, her way of making sure her true wishes were honored." "Can we use it in the trial?" "Absolutely. It's a legally recognized document. If she states her intentions clearly, if she expresses concerns about her children's motivations, it could change everything." We scheduled a viewing for the following week. Harold, me, the prosecutor, and a court stenographer gathered in Harold's conference room to watch Rose Eleanor Miller's final testimony. The video was dated March 15, 2019, almost 2 years before her stroke. Grandma sat in Harold's office, looking directly at the camera, vital and alive and completely herself. "My name is Rose Eleanor Miller," she began. "I'm making this recording as a supplement to my last will and testament, to be viewed only in the event that my competency or my wishes are called into question after my death. I want to make several things very clear. First, I am of sound mind and body as I record this. Harold can attest to that, as can the witnesses present during this recording. Second, I have 3 children, Patricia, Richard, and Diane. I love them, but I know them. I know their weaknesses, their greed, their capacity for self-deception. I've spent my entire life watching them measure my worth in dollars and count down the days until they could claim their inheritance. I built my wealth through hard work, through sacrifice, through 60 years of careful planning and investment, and I'll be damned if I let them squander it on expensive cars and vacation homes and the shallow trappings of wealth they've always valued over actual substance. My original will divides my estate equally among my 3 children with one exception. Sarah Miller, my granddaughter, receives a 50% share, while her mother and my other 2 children split the remaining 50%. Why Sarah? Because she's the only one who's ever visited me without wanting something. She's the only one who calls just to talk, who remembers the stories I tell, who sees me as a person rather than a bank account. She works a modest job taking care of animals because it makes her happy, not because it impresses anyone. She's kind, she's honest, and she's the only one I trust to use this money wisely. If you're watching this video, it means someone has contested my will, or there's been some question about my mental state when I made my final decisions. Let me be unambiguous. If my will has been changed from this original version, it was not by my choice. It was through coercion, manipulation, or worse. I've seen the way my children look at me when they think I'm not watching. I've heard the conversations they have about what happens when mom finally goes. I know exactly what I am to them, an obstacle between them and money they consider rightfully theirs. So let me state this clearly for the record. I want Sarah to inherit the majority of my estate. She's earned it through years of genuine love and care. My children have earned nothing but the bare minimum I'm legally obligated to give them. And if they've harmed me, if they've hastened my death in any way, I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I may love them, but I'm not naive about what people are capable of when enough money is at stake. Sarah, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. Sorry for putting this burden on you. Sorry for making you the target of your family's resentment, but you're strong enough to handle it. You always have been. Take the money, use it well, live a life that matters, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for being the only decent person in this family. She smiled at the camera, that sharp, knowing smile I remembered from childhood. Goodbye, and good luck. The video ended. I sat in that conference room, tears streaming down my face, while Harold quietly passed me a box of tissues. She knew, I whispered. She knew what they'd do. Rose was many things, Harold said gently, but naive wasn't one of them. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Margaret Flores, rewound the video and watched it again, then a third time. This changes everything, she said finally. This is direct testimony from the victim about her wishes and her concerns about her children. Combined with your video evidence of them drugging her and forcing her to sign documents, we have a compelling narrative. Can we charge them with murder now? I asked. No. The cause of death is still cardiac arrest, but we can use this to show motive, pattern of behavior, consciousness, of guilt, and we can invalidate the new will entirely. What happens to the estate? It reverts to the original 2019 will, which means... She looked at me. You inherit 50%, roughly $9 million. The number didn't feel real. $9 million. More money than I could spend in a lifetime. Money that my grandmother had left me, not because I'd earned it through merit or hard work, but because I loved her. Actually loved her. I don't want it, I said. Harold raised an eyebrow. Sarah, I don't want their motive to have been right. I don't want them to be able to say I did this for money. What do you want? Margaret asked. I thought about Grandma's smile in that video, about the camera footage of her looking at me with recognition and trust, about the promise I'd made to take care of her. I want justice, real justice. I want them to face what they did. Then we'll give you the best trial we can, Margaret said. But Sarah, you need to understand, even with this video, even with everything you've documented, juries are unpredictable. Your family will have expensive lawyers who'll paint you as manipulative, who'll argue your grandmother was paranoid or that you influenced her to make that video. This won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy. She smiled grimly. Fair point. The trial started on a Monday in April, 6 months after Grandma's death. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Somehow this had become a media sensation, the wealthy Connecticut family accused of murdering their matriarch for inheritance money. Court TV wanted to broadcast it. Netflix was already developing a documentary. I walked through the crowd in a modest black dress, ignoring the shouted questions, and took my seat in the gallery behind the prosecution table. My family sat on the other side of the courtroom. Mom, Richard, and Diane, all dressed in expensive suits, flanked by their legal team. They didn't look at me. Hadn't looked at me since the video evidence leaked to the press, and their faces were plastered across every news outlet in the state. Jennifer was there too, sitting behind Mom, offering moral support to the woman who'd held a pillow over her own mother's bed. Marcus was noticeably absent. His law firm had quietly asked him to take a leave of absence until the family matter was resolved. The trial took 3 weeks. The prosecution played the videos, all of them, hours of footage showing my family systematically drugging and manipulating a helpless woman. The jury watched in silence as Mom crushed pills and mixed them into water, as Richard guided Grandma's trembling hand to sign documents, as Diane went through the jewelry box like a looter in a condemned building. And then they played Grandma's video will. The courtroom went absolutely silent as Rose Miller looked out from the screen and told everyone exactly what she'd known would happen, exactly what her children were capable of. When it ended, one of the jurors was crying. The defense did their best. They brought in medical experts who testified that the medications, while not prescribed, weren't necessarily harmful, that many caregivers made judgment calls about pain management and sedation, that Grandma's death was consistent with natural causes. They painted me as a scorned granddaughter who'd been left out of the original will and manipulated her way into Grandma's good graces. They suggested the video will had been made under duress, that I'd coached Grandma on what to say. They called Jennifer to testify. My sister sat on the stand in a cream-colored suit looking fragile and sad and told the jury about how I'd always been jealous of the family, how I'd always felt like an outsider, how I'd moved back into Mom's house specifically to isolate Grandma and turn her against everyone else. Sarah was obsessed with the inheritance, Jennifer said, dabbing at her eyes. She'd talk about it constantly, about how unfair it was that Mom and Uncle Richard got everything. She wanted Grandma to change the will. And did you see evidence of this? The defense attorney asked. Yes. She'd spend hours alone with Grandma, whispering things we couldn't hear, and then suddenly Grandma started acting cold toward our mother, refusing to see her. It was Sarah poisoning her mind. It was a masterful performance, in complete fiction. But I couldn't prove it was fiction. I had video of what happened in Grandma's room, but I didn't have video of every conversation, every moment. There were gaps, hours when I was at work, times when I'd turn the camera off to give Grandma privacy during personal care. The defense exploited every gap. They suggested I'd turn the camera off during the moments when I was coaching Grandma, manipulating her, convincing her that her children were stealing from her. They pointed out that I was the one who stood to gain the most from Grandma's death, $9 million. Who really had motive here? The defense attorney asked in his closing argument. The children who were already receiving an inheritance, or the granddaughter who was receiving nothing until she convinced a vulnerable, stroke-addled woman to change her will? It was brilliant. Sickening, but brilliant. Margaret Flores gave her closing argument on a Friday afternoon. She walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, the videos, the medical testimony about the unprescribed medications, Harold Finch's testimony about the coerced will changes, the financial records showing Diane had stolen nearly $100,000 in jewelry, the forged power of attorney documents, and then she played Grandma's video, Will one more time. Rose Miller knew, Margaret said quietly. She knew what her children were capable of. She knew that her love wouldn't be enough to stop them from betraying her when there was money at stake. And she tried to protect herself. She made this video. She left clear instructions about her wishes. But she didn't know about the stroke. She didn't know she'd become vulnerable, helpless, trapped in a body that wouldn't obey, while her mind stayed sharp enough to understand exactly what was happening to her. The defense wants you to believe that Sarah Miller is the villain of this story, that she manipulated her grandmother, turned her against her family, invented evidence of abuse. But ask yourselves, who installed cameras to document the truth? Who reported the abuse to Adult Protective Services? Who tried to save Rose Miller's life? And who drugged her? Who forged her signature? Who stood over her bed in the middle of the night with a pillow in their hands? Rose Miller told you, in her own words, who she trusted, who she wanted to inherit her legacy, and who she feared would harm her for money. Don't let them rewrite her story. Honor her wishes. Find them guilty. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I spent those 2 days in my apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep, checking my phone every 5 minutes for updates from Margaret. On Sunday afternoon, the call came. They've reached a verdict, Margaret said. Court convenes tomorrow at 9 a.m. I don't remember driving to the courthouse. Don't remember walking through the doors or taking my seat. I was numb, floating, existing in some space outside my own body. The jury filed in. 12 people who'd spent 3 weeks watching my family's dirty laundry aired in public, who'd seen the worst of human nature on display. I tried to read their faces. Couldn't. The 4 persons stood, a middle-aged woman in a blue cardigan looking tired and serious. In the case of the state versus Patricia Miller on the charge of elder abuse in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. Mom's face crumpled. Behind her, Jennifer started crying. On the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult? Guilty. On the charge of fraud? Guilty. 3 for 3, the same verdict for Richard for Diane. Guilty on all counts, not murder. They'd never be charged with murder, never face justice for the actual taking of Grandma's life. But they'd face justice for everything that led up to it. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. Margaret had warned me that elder abuse cases often resulted in minimal jail time. Probation, community service, fines. The system doesn't take these cases as seriously as it should, she'd said. But this case was different. This case had video evidence, media attention, a video will from the victim naming her abusers. Judge Catherine Walsh presided. She was in her 60s, gray-haired, with an expression that suggested she'd seen every terrible thing humans were capable of, and still managed to be disappointed when confronted with new examples. She'd watched the videos during trial. I'd seen her face when Grandma's video was played. She hadn't looked away. My mother's attorney made a plea for leniency, talked about her decades of teaching, her community involvement, her clean record, painted her as a woman who'd made mistakes under the stress of caregiving, but who was fundamentally good. Judge Walsh listened without expression. When it was Margaret's turn, she didn't speak for long. Your Honor, the evidence in this case speaks for itself. Patricia Miller, Richard Miller, and Diane Miller systematically abused a vulnerable woman for financial gain. They drugged her to keep her compliant. They forced her to sign legal documents while incapacitated. They stole from her. And they did all of this while pretending to care for her, while accepting the community's praise for their devotion. Rose Miller died afraid of her own children. That's what the evidence shows. She died knowing she'd been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect her. The defense wants you to show mercy, but these defendants showed no mercy to their mother. I ask that you impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. Judge Walsh nodded slowly, looked at my mother, who sat stone-faced beside her attorney. Patricia Miller, please rise. Mom stood. I could see her hands shaking. I've been a judge for 23 years, Walsh said. In that time, I've seen a lot of elder abuse cases. Most of them are sad. Family members overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities, making poor decisions out of desperation or exhaustion. I can empathize with those cases, even when I have to impose sentences. This is not one of those cases. You didn't abuse your mother out of desperation. You abused her out of greed. You saw an opportunity when she had a stroke, an opportunity to control her, to rewrite her legacy, to claim money you felt entitled to. The video evidence shows calculated, systematic abuse over an extended period. You knew exactly what you were doing. You planned it. You executed it with the help of your siblings. And when your own daughter tried to protect her grandmother, you attempted to discredit her, to paint her as the villain. Your mother saw you clearly. She knew what you were capable of, and she tried to protect herself by leaving a video statement. But she couldn't protect herself from a stroke, from becoming vulnerable in a way that made her dependent on the very people she feared most. I want to be clear. I believe you hastened your mother's death. I believe the medications you gave her, the stress you subjected her to, the systematic betrayal, all of it contributed to her cardiac arrest. But I can't prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, which is why you're not facing murder charges. However, I can impose the maximum sentence for the crimes you did commit. On the charge of elder abuse in the first degree, 4 years in state prison. On the charge of financial exploitation, 5 years to run consecutively. On the charge of fraud, an additional 3 years, also consecutive. Total sentence, 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 85%. 12 years. I watched the number sink into my mother's face, watched her finally break, collapsing into her attorney's arms. Richard and Diane received identical sentences, 12 years for each of them. They'd be in their 70s when they got out, old themselves, vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that courtroom. The new will, the forged one, was invalidated entirely. Grandma's original 2019 will was reinstated. I inherited $9 million. My mother, Richard, and Diane each received their legally mandated minimum inheritance, $1 each, as specified in Grandma's original will. She'd been thorough. She'd made sure they couldn't claim they'd been accidentally excluded. The rest of their share went to charity, specifically to organizations fighting elder abuse and supporting vulnerable seniors. Even in death, Grandma had the last word. I sat in Harold's office while he explained the details of my inheritance, the properties, the investments, the cash accounts, numbers that still didn't feel real. "What will you do with it?" he asked. I'd been thinking about that for months, since the verdict, since I'd watched my family led away in handcuffs, since I'd stood in an empty courtroom and felt nothing but exhaustion. "I'm going to start a foundation," I said, "for elder abuse prevention and prosecution, to help families who can't afford cameras, who don't have evidence, who watch their loved ones suffer and can't prove what's happening." Harold smiled. "Rose would have liked that. And I'm going to make sure every nursing home and care facility in this state has resources for residents who feel unsafe, hidden cameras, direct lines to adult protective services, legal support." "That's a lot of work." "I know. I'll need to hire people, build an organization, actually make a difference." "You already made a difference, Sarah. You saved the evidence. You brought them to justice." "I didn't save her, though. That's what I'll have to live with." We sat in silence for a moment. "You did everything you could," Harold said finally. "You were one person against 3 determined criminals. The fact that you documented what they did, that you fought for her even after she died, that's heroic." "It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like I lost." "You didn't lose. They're in prison. Rose's wishes are being honored. Her money is going to help people instead of being squandered by children who didn't deserve it. That's not losing." Maybe he was right. Maybe this was what winning looked like when there were no good outcomes, only less terrible ones. I signed the papers, accepted the inheritance, became, overnight, wealthier than I'd ever imagined, and I felt nothing but tired. The Rose Miller Foundation officially launched in October, 1 year after I'd installed the camera in Grandma's room. We'd partnered with adult protective services across 3 states, distributed thousands of hidden cameras to families with concerns about elder care, funded 24-hour hotlines for reporting abuse, hired lawyers to take elder abuse cases pro bono. I'd quit my job at the veterinary clinic, not because I didn't love it, but because running a foundation was a full-time job, and then some. I missed the cats and dogs, missed the simple act of helping animals who couldn't help themselves. But this work mattered more. I gave interviews, told Grandma's story over and over to anyone who'd listen, appeared on news programs and podcasts and at conferences, always showing the same clips from the camera footage, the ones that captured the essence of what had happened without being too graphic. People needed to see. They needed to understand that this wasn't rare, wasn't unusual, that elder abuse happened in nice suburban homes with families who looked normal from the outside. That love wasn't always enough to protect the people who'd loved us first. On the anniversary of Grandma's death, I visited her grave for the first time since the funeral I hadn't attended. The headstone was simple. Rose Eleanor Miller, 1937-2024, beloved mother and grandmother. The beloved felt like a lie, but I hadn't been consulted on the inscription. My mother had arranged the funeral before she was arrested, had chosen the words that made her look good. I brought daisies, the cheap ones from the grocery store, the kind Grandma actually liked. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I said to the granite marker. I tried. I really tried, but I was too late. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. A beautiful October day, crisp and bright. The kind of day Grandma would have spent reviewing rental agreements and terrorizing lazy property managers. "I'm using the money the way you wanted, trying to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other people." I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if anything could be enough. I sat there for a long time, in the grass next to her grave, crying in a way I hadn't let myself cry during the trial or the sentencing or any of the media interviews. I cried for the grandmother I'd loved, for the woman who'd built an empire and died helpless in a hospital bed in her daughter's house. For all the moments I should have had with her, the holidays, the phone calls, the ordinary moments that had been stolen by people who'd valued money more than love. And I cried for myself, for the family I'd lost, for the mother I'd sent to prison, for the sister who wouldn't speak to me anymore, who'd stood by Mom through everything and still believed I was the villain. I was alone now, wealthy beyond measure, and completely alone. Eventually, I stood up, brushed the grass off my jeans, placed the daisies at the base of the headstone. "I hope you're proud of me," I said. "I hope this is what you wanted." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery. And for just a moment, I could almost hear her voice, sharp and knowing and absolutely certain. "You did good, Sarah. You did real good." I'm sitting in my office at the foundation headquarters, watching a news report about our latest case. A family in Massachusetts. Daughter noticed her father was becoming increasingly sedated during nursing home visits. She installed a camera, caught the staff stealing his medications and selling them. Our foundation provided legal support. The case resulted in 3 arrests and new oversight protocols for every nursing home in the state. My phone buzzes, a text from Harold. "Your mother's parole hearing is next month. They'll probably ask if you want to provide a statement." I stare at the message for a long time. Mom has served 3 years of her 12-year sentence. She's been a model prisoner, according to the reports, taken classes, participated in therapy, written me letters that I've never opened. Jennifer thinks I should forgive her. She visits Mom regularly, brings the grandkids, maintains the fiction that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Richard and Diane maintain their innocence too. They've given interviews from prison claiming they were victims of a vindictive granddaughter and an unjust legal system. The truth doesn't matter to some people. They'll rewrite history until they believe their own lies. I type back to Harold. "I'll be there. Because I want Mom to see me, want her to look across that parole board room and remember what she did, who she did it to, what it cost her. Not just the prison time, not just the money, but the daughter who used to love her, the granddaughter who died in terror because of her, the family that could have been something real instead of something rotten. I want her to see what she destroyed." My assistant knocks on the door. "Sarah, the reporter from 60 Minutes is here for your interview." "Give me 5 minutes." I look at the photo on my desk. It's the only picture I have of Grandma from her last months. A candid shot I took one afternoon when she was having a good day, when the medications had worn off enough for her to smile, really smile, with warmth in her eyes. She's looking at me in that photo, and I can still see it. The recognition, the trust, the hope that I'd be enough to save her. I wasn't. But I'm saving others. Every camera we distribute, every case we take, every family we help. It's one less person dying alone and afraid. It's not redemption. Nothing could redeem what happened. But it's something. I smooth my blazer, check my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me is older than the one who installed a camera in her grandmother's room a year ago. Harder, sadder, but still standing, still fighting. I pick up the photo of Grandma, press a kiss to the glass, and set it back on my desk. "I won't let them forget you," I whisper. "I promise." Then I walk out to meet the reporter, to tell the story one more time, to make sure that somewhere, someone who needs to hear it will understand. When you see something wrong, you document it, you fight it, you don't look away, even if it costs you everything, especially then.